if you have your club championship that year, if you have your other events, or if you have your league, if you have rounds where your score matters, I need you to make a commitment. If you want to try to play better in those events, you either have to treat that round like every other round you play, or you have to change the way you warm up for every other round to match the way you want to play in those events that matter. Hey there, welcome to episode 13 of the Golf Never Sleeps podcast. I'm your host, PGA of Canada golf coach Ryan Robillard, and on this podcast, I like to spend some time going through some different scenarios and some different things that can help some players play better golf, but at times practice and prepare more efficiently. On today's episode, I'm going to go down that practice and prepare more efficiently, and today's episode I have titled Club Championship Thoughts. And I know that this episode will be coming out more towards the end of September, and that's past, and that time has passed for many players. But I had a golfer reach out to me recently with the message essentially by text saying, "Hey Ryan, I'm playing in my first individual stroke play event. Any advice or any tips?" And when I first read that message, I'll be quite honest, at first, I was kind of taken back because, and what I mean by that, nothing against the player, but I was really kind of trying to figure out why his mindset was like, hey, I'm playing my own golf ball in a tournament, any tips? And it really got me thinking, and I want to talk about it today. I guess the foundation I'll lay first is we can kind of bring this down to whether you're a recreational golfer or a competitive golfer. When we play in tournaments and when we play in stroke play events, we always tend to feel a lot of additional pressure. And for juniors and collegiate players that play a lot of events over time, we kind of grow some thicker skin and kind of get used to playing in competition. But this today might be geared more towards the club level golfer that maybe they only play in their club championship once every couple of years, or maybe one time they'll play in a member guest, or some different events where they're playing their own ball in competition, which is something that they don't normally do. I see it happen a lot, and I see it with a lot of my adults, and oftentimes I kind of look back and say, asking that question will set us up for failure. Hey, I'm playing my own ball in a tournament this upcoming Saturday. What should I do differently? At first, kind of my smart-ass answer was like, well, you shouldn't be doing anything differently. But then I took a step back before I responded and thought, this player's obviously applied some pressure to them, or they are trying to apply some pressure to themselves and apply some expectation. So how can I kind of resonate? Because if my response back was, oh, you're playing in a tournament, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And if my feedback to him was to do everything way differently than he normally would do, he would probably have one of his worst rounds of the year. And I think oftentimes that's what players do. They lead into events and like the day of the event, they decide they're going to start to do something different that day. Oh, it's a tournament. I'm going to focus more. I'm going to pay more attention. But that ends up being so different than what they normally do in their normal rounds that usually that will lead to a very poor result. I even start to see this when I play golf with my students, or when I play with other people and they know that I'm a golf coach, and it's almost like they try to do things differently because I'm watching. And usually like clockwork, they don't get off to the best start, and they'll kind of give me the classic, hey, I normally don't play this bad. And usually my feedback to them is like, look, let's relax. Let's take a breath. I just want to play some golf, and I just want to watch you play some golf. Whatever you do is fine by me. I don't need you to change your habits. I don't need you to change the way you do things today. Let's just play some golf. So let's go back a few steps now. How do we get into this mindset? I'm playing in my club championship. This matters so much, and then we play poorly. I think we set ourselves up because there's usually a very big disconnect from the way that we play our normal rounds of golf. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this podcast episode. If you are, I have a favor to ask. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and make sure you hit that bell to make sure you get notified on when a new episode drops. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, please make sure you subscribe there as well. But if you could leave me a rating, wherever you're listening or watching, if you do those things for me, it really helps the podcast grow and also motivates me to put out more content. And as always, on any platform, if you ever have any questions, please reach out, let me know. I answered every comment. Now let's get you back to your episode. When we play our normal rounds of golf, and I'm going to make some assumptions here, so I apologize, but the average club level golfer usually doesn't warm up, usually doesn't stretch. They kind of sprint to the first tee, they put a tee in the ground, and away they go. And there's some players that play very good golf when they do that. But then that same player now on club championship day decides that they're going to show up like an hour before their tee time, and they're going to chip, and they're going to putt, and they're going to go to the driving range. But that change in routine sends messages to our brain that we're doing something differently, and sometimes that'll get some bells to go off in our head, and usually will raise our anxiety levels. I'll never forget this one player. This player, we'll call him Mr. Jones. I had never seen him at the driving range in my life. And I had worked at this club for several years. And the day before club championship, it was like 6 o'clock at night, and he was on the driving range. And I just kind of remember looking like, what the heck is Mr. Jones doing? The next day, he has a morning tee time, and he never warms up before his round of golf. He's a trunk slammer, just right to the first tee. And he's on the driving range hitting balls. And again, I kind of found it so weird. Let's say he was a player who normally shot in the 80s. He shot like 107. Like literally shot over 100. The worst round of his life. At the time, I was a very young coach, and and he wasn't my student, but I was just a very young coach. And knowing what I know now, I would have maybe, after the event, maybe offered him maybe just some perspective. But it was clear he had put some pressure on himself. And all what he did leading up to that event was put on more pressure, because he went to the range thinking like, okay, I'm going to practice these 2 days before, and I'm going to hit balls beforehand. So I'm going to get to number one tee, and I'm just going to feel so perfect. But that's not the way I believe it works for a lot of us, and the way that we apply expectation. Another word I get with expectations, players tell me that they're very nervous. I'm very nervous for tournaments, and even all of us. And I believe it's Tiger Woods who's on record saying like, or maybe it was Jack Nicklaus, who was like, if you're not nervous on the first tee, the event you're playing in doesn't matter. And I think oftentimes we look at nerves as a negative. But if we look at all the things that mean something to us, job interviews, first dates, wedding days, meaningful competition that we play in, all those events that happen, we're usually nervous. It's because they mean something to us. Being nervous isn't a bad thing. And I think over time, and I'll talk about a few of these things as we go, how we can prepare and get used to being nervous and knowing that it's okay. So when should we start preparing for an event? Let's say you're Mr. Jones and you have club championship coming up. I literally think when you're playing in an event, whether it be a club championship or a stroke play event, you have to treat that event like it's every other round of golf that you play. If you don't, then that starts to mess with our expectation. That starts to mess with our mindset. So then if a player says, okay, well, I want to be more prepared though, this round matters to me more, I need you to look at the habits you have leading up to that. If every round of golf you play, you just sprint to the first tee, you never warm up, you never chip and putt, that's the way you play golf. And if that's not the way that you want to play competitive golf or rounds that matter, you need to start changing that habit long before that club championship day. If you feel to play your best golf in your club championship that you want to get to the golf course half an hour before, you want to chip, you want to go to the range, you want to hit balls, You have to actually go through that process over and over and over again so that your preparation feels normal. When we do something differently for the first time, it usually feels very odd, and sometimes we feel uncomfortable and sometimes we feel anxious. And if you're a player that never goes to the driving range beforehand, then all of a sudden you just decide that you're going to start going to the driving range the day before your club championship, those messages you're sending to yourself are setting you up for failure. Another one that I see, so let's say we are the player that goes to the driving range. And when they go to the driving range, they never use alignment rods. They never make practice swings. They just like machine gun golf balls out there. Basically, that's what they do to try to warm themselves up. But yet, when it's an event that matters, now they're on the driving range and they're taking way more time. They're making practice swings. They have an alignment rod down and they're trying to go through different targets and trying to work on different yardages. And then that player will come off of that tournament round and say, I went to the range. I was just thinking way too much. Well, of course you were, because you took what you normally do and did something completely opposite. If you think that the way that you play good golf has to do with the way that you line yourself up, making some practice swings, trying to hit actual yardages on the driving range, then you should do that actually before you play every round. Because I guess the point that I'm trying to make as I go through this, your club championship round is another round of golf. The golf ball doesn't know what's going on. The golf course doesn't know what's going on. And the people around you do not or shouldn't have any effect on the golf that you're about to play. If we start to let those outside factors in, which we normally do when these rounds start to matter, that's what can set us up for failure. So, how should we look at our normal rounds? How should we look at our league rounds? The player that I mentioned at the start who sent me that text, he plays in a league on Tuesday nights. And I kind of laughed after where I'm like, you play your own ball in a stroke play event every Tuesday night. Like you're actually playing quote unquote a tournament, because in our league, you hold all your putts and every shot counts and you play by the rules. Like you're playing in competition every single Tuesday. That is no different than this club championship event, other than the way that you look at it. And when I said that to him and we spoke about it in person after, he kind of was like, yeah, I guess you're right. So I'm like, all right, to this point, you've played 17 tournament rounds this year because you've played 17 Tuesday nights, but he never looked at it that way. And he kind of looked at it after and said, well, maybe not on Saturdays and Sundays, like I'm not going to worry about it so much, but maybe when I play my league nights, I'm going to prepare a little bit more. And I'm going to treat those and try to make decisions, quote unquote, as if I was in a tournament. And I thought for that player, that was a great way to bridge the gap. Because I know that we have casual rounds where we don't care, and I know that sometimes we have events that really matter. And I don't expect this player to go from caring about 1 round a year to caring about 60 rounds a year. But maybe there's a gap in there that they can bridge where they say, before my league rounds, I'm going to get to the golf course a little bit earlier. I'm going to warm up. I'm going to chip. I'm going to putt. I'm going to feel like this is for them a competitive event. So I can refer this to my own game a little bit. So normally I also play in a league on Tuesday nights, and I also play on weekend mornings. My Tuesday night league, I'm normally getting to the golf course after a day of work where I've worked and done some different things, and I don't play a lot of afternoon golf. So for me, it's the opposite. When I play on Tuesday league, I'm just happy that I'm out there playing golf for the second time that week. If I play good, that's cool. If I don't play good, whatever. I'm just out there for another 9 holes. I normally don't get to the golf course that long before my tee time. I normally don't chip and putt as much as an average round. But when I flip the switch, Sunday mornings is the money game that I play in with our normal group of guys at our club. And Sunday mornings for me is my equivalent of a tournament round. Almost regardless of the tee time, I am at the golf course 45 minutes before my tee time. I go to the driving range. I've done the same warm-up at home as I always do. I go through the exact same warm-up routine. I'm on the driving range for roughly 20 minutes. I chip and putt for 10 minutes, I chip for 10 minutes. I putt for 10 minutes. I give myself 5 minutes to get to the tee. I have a very regimented, very consistent warm-up routine. A few weeks ago, I went to play in a Pro-Am at a club that's not my own, and at a club that I normally don't play at with a bunch of people I didn't know. I got to the golf course. I gave myself a little bit more time because there was registration, etc. But once I was all registered, ready to go, I had 45 minutes till I had to be at my cart, and I went through the exact same warm-up that I normally go through. This event was different. It was an event where they had a professional purse. You were keeping your own score. Well, obviously keeping your own score. But I went through the exact same warm-up, and when I got out to the golf course and a shotgun start on a golf course I don't know with people I didn't know, it didn't feel that different to me because I went through the exact same warm-up that I normally go through, so I had a sense of normalcy. And I think for those of you that are listening right now, that's something I want you to take away. If you have competition throughout the year, you have your member guest that you play in, you have your club invitational, you play in a local amateur tour, you play in your club championship. I know that those events matter to you, but you can't wait till the week before it all of a sudden feel like you're really going to make a change, and that's drastically going to affect the way that you play. I want you to look at it as if you have your club championship that year, if you have your other events, or if you have your league, if you have rounds where your score matters, I need you to make a commitment. If you want to try to play better in those events, you either have to treat that round like every other round you play, or you have to change the way you warm up for every other round to match the way you want to play in those events that matter. If you commit to making that change, that's going to bring some normalcy into what you do. And then when you get out to the golf course on that day, your body and your brain are in the same mindset, hey, I'm here to play golf. Now, I hope that this doesn't come across that I've simplified sports psychology, because that's not what I'm trying to do. But just one thing that I often see is when players really sabotage themselves because they drastically change the way that they warm up for these events. Because if you think about it, like I said before, especially if it's at your home club, the design of the golf course didn't change. The golf ball doesn't know what route they're doing. The only thing that changes, if we're not careful, is the way that we prepare and the way that we think about those rounds. But if we treat all of those rounds the same, we're not going to have as much variability. So that means for a lot of players, you have to start caring a lot less about club championship and how you play, or start caring a lot more about your casual rounds you play with your friends. So in either scenario, what can we learn from these events? What unfortunately oftentimes I see from club level golfers and from a lot of competitive players, or let's say juniors, college players, that kind of stuff, unfortunately oftentimes they don't have the day that they expect. They don't play that well, they don't shoot scores as they want, and especially for club level golfers, sometimes it ends up being that unfortunate blow up round of the year. And I think a lot of players will just find a way to be as negative and condescending as they can. Worst round of the year, I got the worst breaks, I had 10 bad bounces, and they just start to list the excuses. But something that you can do, and let's say you fell in the trap where you treated your club championship extremely different, and you had a brutal round, I want you to honestly look at yourself and your game in the mirror and say, if I could have changed everything about the way that I prepared and everything about the way that I acted, what could I have changed? And if we have that reflection period, that is you laying the foundation where after a bad round, if you could do everything different, what would you change? And now you're starting to lay the foundation. I'm going to learn from this event, and this is what I'm going to do differently to prepare. This is what I'm going to do differently the way I act on the golf course. I'm going to treat it like this instead. Vice versa, let's say you're coming off of an event and you've had a fantastic round. You were way lower than you normally shoot. A lot of players would just kind of, again, do away with it and say, oh, I wish I could do that every day. If you play very well in a competitive round, you should be looking back saying, why did it go so well today? Did I get enough sleep? What was my warm-up like? What was the thoughts I had on the golf course? I felt calm on the first tee. Why did I feel calm on the first tee? And essentially audit and honestly look at it, especially if we only play a couple, let's call them meaningful events a year, to say, man, I played really well today, and this is why I'm going to remember this. And it might be because you decided you went to the driving range and you actually went through your routine on the driving range or whatever little thing it might be. But for so many of us, I just need you after every competitive round that matters to you, whether it's good or bad, to grab one or two things that can start to build some positive momentum for the next time that you play. I can summarize this episode by saying, for many of us, we really overemphasize the importance of our competitive rounds. And one way that we have to look at it is, I think for a lot of us, we have a decision to make. I need you to either start treating your competitive rounds or your meaningful rounds like every other round, or you need to change the way that you prepare for every other round so when you get to that day, it doesn't feel that different. The more normal it is, I believe the more normal time we can have on the golf course. If it's very different and very volatile, I believe that that's going to lead to a very different and volatile day on the golf course. I'm not a sports psychologist, but that's a lot of what I hear and see and provide feedback to a lot of my players, especially casual club level golfers when it comes to competition. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you already subscribe. And if you're following along on whatever podcast service, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, that you'll consider subscribing and leaving me a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks again. We'll see you next time on the Golf Never Sleeps podcast. Happy golfing.